just to give you a flavor of what we're going to be discussing today. During today's session, we're going to be doing a bit of a simulation of a conversation between a customer and a solution architect that would circle around a customer's challenges that pertain to meeting compliance, as it pertains to network security, and how Network Security Director can help address those issues today. As part of that, we're going to be playing a few roles. So Moon will be playing the role of the customer. I will be your friendly neighborhood solution architect. And with that, we will be covering the following topics, as you see here. One, the overview of the key challenges customers face today as it pertains to network security, keeping track of those changes at scale as things change quickly, prioritizing network security issues, what to attack first, second, third, determining the right remediation steps in terms of what services, what rule sets to implement in various places, as well as reporting on network security posture as a whole for either your internal stakeholders or for audit purposes. So with that, kick it off to Moon.
Thank you, Neil. All right, so I'm a senior manager in the organization of a financial services firm. We have sensitive cardholder data, and we have to meet an audit. So I have a 90-day window to meet that audit. Now, there are issues that I'm having. I've been here before. There are issues around collecting information from diverse teams, reconciling spreadsheets, making sure that the EC2s and the ALB teams are talking and they have the right controls in place. I have asset scanners in place, and I also have inventory tools in place, but they've not worked in the past. In addition to the PCI DSS audit that I need to complete in 90 days, there are other types of regulatory frameworks that I abide by. So for example, there's a general security framework, NIST, that you're all aware of, that I need to abide by. We also have regional presence in Europe. So things like GDPR are of relevance to me. In addition to that, when I look at all of these different compliance guidelines, typically either they are mandating that I have some type of inventory management or they're recommending it. So I've used scanners in the past. They break systems on the network. There are NetOps guys who actually stop the scans from happening. And when they do happen, they provide incomplete data back to me. And the data is somewhat very myopic. It doesn't have a view of the entire landscape. So I have a list, but I don't have a plan. That's the issue. But it's not only compliance. There are also issues around the multi-vector threats that I'm trying to mitigate in my environment. So I could have, for example, a web exploit going through CloudFront. There could be lateral movement of misconfigured EC2s that originate sort of lateral nefarious kind of activity. Or it could be a data exfiltration attempt outside a misconfigured API gateway. So these are all things that can do a lot of damage to my environment. So I need to make sure that I've got the right web ACLs on my WAF, I've got the right NACLs, I've got the right security groups, all doing things in a coordinated fashion. Because when I look at the multi-vector threat environment, typically they have very similar behaviors, starting with rattling the doorknob, with reconnaissance activity, establishing backdoor access. Then the attacker will infiltrate the malware, create a command and control channel for communicating with the malware, and then replicating it laterally for that propagation. So one thing's for sure, in terms of the types of devices and services that are actually detecting it, they're very diverse. The entry points are very diverse. And then lastly, the mitigation actions that I take to stop all of these things, these bad things, they're also diverse, and they're not necessarily the same services that are detecting them. So right now, I've got 21 different security vendors in my network. It's a hodgepodge, it's a mess, there's lack of coordination, and I'm in a bind in terms of trying to meet my audit objectives.
Well, I think this is something that we hear from customers all the time, right? These are complex problems when it comes to time to understand, one, what are the resources in my environment? How are they configured? What are the gaps in those configurations? And what do I do about it in a very straightforward manner to reduce time to mitigation, right? And with that, we have a solution that we launched yesterday in preview, which is AWS Shield Network Security Director. And it does 4 key things to keep in mind here. One is visualization of your network. Identify resources within an account, understand how they are connected together, how they are related to each other, and give you an idea of overall, what do you even have to begin with. Second is prioritization of configuration risks, or configuration gaps rather. Understanding which ones are the most critical. What do I address first, second, third? And then third is, or the third item here is, how do I quickly respond to these gaps? There are a myriad of services that I can use to implement services. I can implement rules on those services. Where do I even implement those services in the first place? Do I even need a service in a given location, depending on the architecture? All of that boils down to what are the steps I take to remediate a configuration gap. And then lastly, the ability to report out on the overall network security posture of your environment. What are my critical gaps that I need to go address? What do I need to tell my stakeholders, my auditors, when it comes to addressing my network security posture? So this is what Shield Network Security Director helps with. So let's talk about the first aspect of this, which is the visibility aspect. So what Network Security Director does is it initiates a network analysis for you in your account. You can do it in a single region or all regions for an account. And in doing so, we scan for or analyze the resources that you see here, such as Cloudfront distributions, EC2 instances, load balancers, API gateways, the list goes on, as you see here. The network security services that we're analyzing, including the rule sets within, are WAF, security groups, and NACLs. We are identifying these and constructing a network topology on your behalf so that you can actually see in a map how these resources are connected and related to each other. As I mentioned before, getting started is as simple as clicking a button in the console to run a network analysis. You specify one or all regions for the account, and you are off and running. And upon completion of that network analysis, you're taken to the dashboard. And I'll zoom in here on aspects of this dashboard for you. The first part is an overall summary of what are the most critical things in my environment I need to go look at right away based on a severity level we've assigned to a given resource. You can then drill down further. You can look at severities of resources by resource type and the distribution of those severities for those resources. You also get a picture of what types of resources were identified in the first place. We break it down by compute and networking resources, as well as security resources, which are the firewalls in question, which are WAF, security groups, and NACLs to begin with, as well as a drill down of what was identified by severity level. Severities are driven by findings on the individual resources, and those findings equate to configuration gaps that we've identified. The resources severity that you saw on the prior screenshot is driven by the most severe finding on that resource, and a resource could have a multitude of findings.
But you know, from my perspective, it's really hard to keep track of changes. I have a very dynamic environment. I've got hundreds of app developers pushing code on a daily basis. I've got systems that are spinning up and spinning down. I've got EC2s and VPCs that are either modified or actually instantiated on a daily basis. I have very little visibility if someone instantiated an app that has access to nefarious activity or has access to the outside internet. I have no way of figuring out what is changing from an hour-to-hour basis, literally. I've used things like configuration management databases and change tracking tools, but the problem is that it always comes down to the app developer doing the right thing and tagging the right things for me to actually make any type of intelligent decisions on that. So what I've also done is taken VPC flow logs to manually correlate that with my assets. And what I find out is that when I generate the report, it's stale, it's too late, it's already changed. So based on this network dynamicism, I'm having a serious problem in terms of keeping up from a time perspective.
Again, this is something we continue to hear all the time, and I completely empathize with you, Moon, here. What Network Security Director helps in this regard with is As I mentioned previously, in terms of the visualization, how we map your network for you. And this network topology that we're showing right now on the screen has to do with how often you run your network analysis, and it identifies changes in your network every single time, including changes in connectivity, resources that were spun down, spun up, things of that nature. And in the diagram that you see here, we are calling out very specific network architectures with regard to the resources in question. One, we are identifying resource relationships. The relationships in question are based on identifying common tags, containment relationships, and by that I mean, for example, you have a VPC that contains multiple EC2 instances, ENIs, subnets, things of that nature, and identifying that one entity belongs to a larger entity. We also look at geographical proximity in terms of what is in front of a resource or behind a resource from a connectivity perspective, such as a CloudFront distribution in front of an application load balancer. Protective resources, so in this case, for example, a network security service like WAF, you would have a web ACL associated with, say, an API gateway, or an ALB, or a CloudFront distribution in this case. And you can see that shown here as well. That would constitute a protection and is denoted by the shield icon you see there. Connectivity is validated using automated reasoning. We are assessing reachability between resources as well as out to the internet via connectivity to internet gateway. We are assessing whether a resource can communicate out to the internet as well as receive traffic from the internet and give you a conclusive picture of whether that resource is actually accessible or not. We denote internet accessibility via the blue globe icon on the EC2 instance you see there, denoting that this resource is indeed internet facing. The severity of the resources that you see here as well is predicated on the network context of the resource. If the resource is internet facing, if the resource is connected to other resources that are internet facing, for example, or not. All of that predicates the severity level of the resource and the severity level of the findings on each resource. And this, it can be refreshed every single time you run a network analysis so that you have an up-to-date picture of what your topology looks like, as well as what your resource severities are so that you know exactly what to go tackle and when. We also provide a list of resources for those who require an asset inventory. You can export this list. The list consists of each individual ARN by severity. You also get an indicator of how many findings are on each individual resource. And as we mentioned before, a resource can have multiple findings on it. The findings each have their own severity, and the severity of the resource is driven by the most severe finding on the resource. So if a resource, for example, has 5 findings, it has a few low, a few medium, and a critical, the resource severity will be set to critical so that you can more easily identify what is the most pressing thing I need to address right away.
So now, I have some type of visibility, but I don't have a relative gradation of the types of risks associated with those assets. I have looked at situations where I have an app that is communicating with a staging environment. I have apps that are insulated from the environment. I have apps that are, internet facing as well. And the challenge is that I don't have enough nuance to figure out, are these public entities, are these internal only entities, and so on and so forth. I have used SIMs and CSPMs to get risk ratings out of them, but what I find is that they essentially flag everything. So it's like a needle in a haystack. And they also use static rules as opposed to changing the way that they're visualizing the entire environment based on the dynamicism of my network. So at this point, I'm overwhelmed with alerts, a lot of alert fatigue, and I don't know how to sort of weed through all of the noise to get the relevant information that I'm looking for that will then be actionable in terms of what I need to do next.
This is where Network Security Director helps in terms of noise management by providing an easy way to understand the severity of resources. We've discussed this previously in terms of how we classify and generate our findings specifically. So our findings are derived on a few parameters. One is the configuration of the resource itself. One, what is the resource? Is it internet facing or not? Does it have reachability to the internet? does it also have certain rules configured on it, for example, or certain services attached to it? That is simply a resource level attribute or our set of attributes that we look at. Then there is the actual network context. What else is it talking to? Or what does it have a routable path to? Or could conceivably talk to potentially? All of this context is what derives the given finding. So it's not enough to just say, for example, on an EC2 instance, that I have port 22 open. That might be the case, but it depends on whether that EC2 instance is talking to something else. Does it have reachability from the internet? All of these things come into play when assessing the actual severity of a given configuration. And so in doing so, we look at those factors. We also look at AWS best practices in terms of the configuration recommendations we have codified in documentation, white papers, things of that nature. We also surface threat intelligence to help inform when you should apply certain types of rules to your resources for the services in question that we support. For example, we're surfacing activity relative to DDoS on your resources. If we've identified known offenders of DDoS on your resources in the past, we will surface that as a finding to your resource. We will also surface any bot or scraper activity on your resources to you and recommend specific mitigation actions to address that before an attack potentially occurs. So all of this is meant to help you identify what needs to be addressed right now as opposed to what could potentially wait. In doing so, there is a findings section in the console that you can look at, and that provides you a few pieces of key information that hit on all of these points. One is a finding itself is specific to an individual resource, right? And that same finding type or the issue description can happen on multiple resources and have different severities. So you can easily find a given finding on a given resource in this section of the console by just looking at the severity column, looking at the resource ID in question. We've blurred it out here on purpose, but you would get the actual resource level information here, relevant tagging information, what have you. You also get the number of contributing resources and the issue in question. Now this is where the network context aspect of this comes into play. So in the way we classify our findings is, for example, if you have a web application that is hosted on EC2, you have, for example, an application load balancer ahead of it, then you have upstream of that a Cloudflare distribution. Now, say for example, the Cloudflare distribution does not have any WAF protection enabled on it, neither does the ALB. And we have identified that the web application in question is vulnerable to common web vulnerabilities, the OWASP top 10, for example. In doing so, we look at all three of these aspects. We know that the origin is an EC2 instance. We know that the entry point for the traffic is potentially from CloudFront. And in doing so, we are able to identify that the criticality is on the host itself, on the where the application lives. And therefore, we classify that EC2 instance as critical because we know it is connected to something else that is the ingress path and can then allow malicious threats to come through. And as a result, we identify what are the contributing resources of the finding. You may have no contributing resources in certain cases, but in other cases you would. And this allows you to easily see that, yes, I have a finding on a resource, but it is coming from resource 1, 2, 3. You are also able to suppress acceptable findings. For example, if you are allowing unrestricted communication to a specific port, and you don't want that finding to surface and contribute to the severity of your resource, you can suppress it on a per resource basis. And that way you are now tailoring the severity level of your resource to reflect the requirements of your organization.
All right. So this is where things get a little murky. So I've got the visibility, I've got the relative severity and the threat rating of each of these events. Now, what do I need to do from a remediation standpoint? Not all resources are the same. I have the issue of, first of all, missing a certain response action that I need to do, or I could be overreacting based on a false positive that could disrupt legitimate traffic. What I'm seeing now is that from my SIMs and my CSPM, I'm getting some risk ratings, but most of them are just flagging everything irrespective. And what I need to do is correlate what I'm seeing to the type of risk rating that I'm seeing, and then determine the exact rule that I need. I go into my WAF and I see a laundry list of rules, and I have no idea how these rules actually relate to the type of activity that I'm seeing. So the next remediation action is absolutely critical for not only detecting the bad stuff, but also stopping it.
Moon's bad day continues and is not taking it easy on me. With that in mind, though, Network Security Director can certainly help here as well. For each finding that we previously discussed here, we provide very detailed, actionable remediation steps as in the form of step-by-step instructions. So, for example, for each security group or NACL or network ACL level finding, we provide, in many cases, that same finding can be addressed by a multitude of services. If it's a port open, you can address that potentially with security groups, with network ACLs. All of that is fair game. And so we provide these remediation options to you, accompanied with documentation that explains to you exactly how to go and configure these services and rule sets for you. On the WAF side of things, we will recommend specific managed rule groups, specific rules such as rate limiting rules in the case of, say, for example, a DDoS use case. All of this will be provided to you in terms of concrete steps you can take to harden your security posture from a network security perspective.
All right, well, that simplifies things a lot, but now everything needs to sort of come together. I need to provide my management, as well as the auditors, some level of how to mitigate some of the actions that were brought up during the audit. So I've got individual resource level insights, but what I'm missing is this overall insight across my organization. Now, just based on my day-to-day activities, it's really hard to contact these diverse teams, make sure that they have the right actions in place, make sure that they're interpreting the actions and the alerts properly, and then bringing all of these different spreadsheets together is an absolute nightmare for me. So I need a capability that allows me to create reports that are generated for these auditors or for my management that I can easily comb through volumes and volumes of data. So for example, I just want to look at the top IPs that are internet facing. How many spreadsheets do I need to look through to get that type of information? I just need to be able to do it by a single click.
And this is where we leverage the power of generative AI and Amazon Q, which is, one, to be able to ask in natural language simple questions like, what are my top network security risks or network security issues? What specific issues are pertaining to, say, for example, my application load balancers, my API gateways? Get concrete information in that regard so that so that you can, for example, report it up to stakeholders, for auditors, things of that nature. With Q, you're able to easily pull this information without having to go through disparate tools, correlate information, pull information together into multiple spreadsheets, and generate a report, PowerPoint slide, what have you. With Q, you get a very succinct natural language explanation of what your issues are, how to fix them, with references to key documentation, so that you can report out to your stakeholders exactly what you need to do so that you can take those actions much more quickly and address gaps before an attacker, for example, identifies them. You can launch the Amazon Q experience for analyzing network security from the Amazon Q chat capability in the management console, also from chat applications like Teams, Slack, what have you, to ask questions about your network security posture. You can use to analyze the resources in question that are in your environment, to analyze the findings themselves, identify the severities of resources and findings, and identify the remediation steps across multiple resources. So this helps synthesize all this information for you and give you a very succinct narrative that you can paste into an email, a report, what have you, that you can use to share with other stakeholders. This is meant to help reduce the friction required to help communicate what your network security posture looks like, so you can spend more of your time actually fixing things and monitoring your network instead of generating these reports. So with that, Moon, I think we've helped you a bit here in terms of your audit here. How do you
You've
feel?
helped me from the visualization aspect. You've helped me sift through volumes of data to tell me what's actually relevant in my network. You've given me guidelines relative to the actions that I need to take. And most importantly, I have the ammunition needed to compile all of these data in a very meaningful, coherent manner that I can present to my auditors. It's a great job.
Absolutely, and that is exactly what is intended to be the case with Network Security Director here. And to just summarize what we've gone through today, number one is network topology, right? We are analyzing the resources in your environment. We are understanding how they're connected, related, what is reachable from the internet, what is not reachable from the internet, transitive relationships between resources as well, to help you understand what you have and how traffic theoretically flows between these resources. The findings specific to actual security gaps in your environment based on both AWS best practices, threat intelligence, to help you understand what needs to be implemented, where and when and why. Recommendations around how to make these changes quickly so that you don't have to go look for the various options in terms of what services do I use for what resources, what rule sets do I need, how do I write those rules. All of that is provided to you in the recommendations. And then in terms of reporting, right, which is being able to use natural language and Amazon Q to be able to generate those natural language summaries and analyses for your network security posture so that you can more accurately communicate with your stakeholders exactly what your posture looks like so you can focus more often on the day-to-day of managing your network security posture. Again, AWS Shield Network Security Director is available in preview and is available at no additional cost during the preview period. If you'd like to learn more about AWS Shield Network Security Director, you can use the QR code here to be able to go to the website and learn more details, get to the user guide, things of that nature. That concludes our session here today. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.